Why is libertarianism one of the possibly the greatest of all psyops? Well, so-called libertarianism, as that term is understood in the United States, though originally the term was used in Europe to describe um, sort of left anarchism and socialism in the United States, the term was co-opted to describe a prescription that basically involves um, reducing the size of government. Okay, so how do you reduce the size of government? I suppose generally you would reduce the size of government by ending programs and bureaucracies and ending the funding of them, sort of like what's happening now to some extent. But does reducing the size of government promote liberty? I would say that the conflation of promoting liberty with reducing the size of government is a massive, massive, massive psyop. Okay? Because, well, while government does oppress people, yes, government oppresses people. The state oppresses people. It's an it's an oppressive institution, but that's only one of the things that it is. It does do oppression, but it also is organizes our society. It's an organizing principle to organize society on a mass scale. That's what the state is. Originally we didn't have mass scale societies. We had tribes of like 100 people. Now we have nations of millions and even billions of people. Well, you need an institution that can serve as a function as an organizing principle. You don't need that, but that's what we have because we have built um, economies that are massive and involve the mobilization of massive amounts of uh, resources and manpower. So, what do we have? We have an institution that functions to bring those resources and people in a particular geographic area together in sort of a common purpose. Okay, but yeah, that institution is fucking oppressive as hell. It does all kinds of things that are oppressive as hell in the name of but also in the name of doing what it does, which is to organize our societies and and serve as kind of an organizing principle for all the people and resources within its domain. So, so that's the state, okay? But if you are going to say it's, quote, libertarian to shrink the size of the state because, yes, the state is doing all this oppressing, blah, blah, blah. Sure, it's doing a lot of oppressing. But but to claim that it's going to somehow liberate people to shrink, to just reduce the size of the state, to shrink it down, to, you know, starve it of funding, okay, you can make that argument, but in making that argument, you're actually just postulating that the state is solely responsible for oppression. And Well, there's certainly truth that the state does oppress. The fact of the matter is that in the United States, for as an example, the private sector has always been a full partner with the state in oppressing. We had things called labor wars. We had where they, people were, it was bloody. People were killed for going on strike, for standing up for some many of the rights that we now have, which have been, attacked and and been undermined tremendously, um, in the United States. The like collective bargaining is practically dead. I mean, there are noble efforts to try to revive it, but yeah, um, we do have child labor laws. Um, we have bureaucracies. Yeah, they're sometimes obnoxious, but they like that try to impose safety standards on employers and stuff like that. Which that stuff is coming under attack by people who claim to be libertarians. Let's shrink the size of the state because it's oppressing. But the state has never been the solely responsible for the oppression in the capitalist countries like the United States. In the capitalist, okay, the state has been oppressive. If you're a anarchist, you understand that and you're, if philosophically speaking, you're an anarchist in that you oppose all forms of oppression, and you question and you impose the requirement on all exercise of authority that it be justified in terms of that there be an argument that it is for the common good or whatever. Then anarchism doesn't mean that you want to abolish all forms of authority. It just means that you don't believe that any form of authority is self-justifying. It has to justify itself to the people it's exercising, over whom it's exercising authority. Okay, it has to be able to do that. We can't have a relationship where we're treated like children and our parents don't have to tell us why we're why they why we have to listen to them. They just have a power over us. That's what anarchism proposes. That authority has to justify itself. So if you want to uh, if you're anarchist, you don't believe that that in any institution has self-justifying authority. And I've lost my train of thought. So what was I was talking about the state and the private sector. The private sector doesn't even bother to justify its oppression of people in many cases. It just does it because nakedly, because okay, the bosses just oppress the workers just because they can, right? That's the only justification needed. But so if you're an anarchist, though, you oppose all oppression. It doesn't. You don't have a particular hard on for oppression that's just coming from the state. You oppose all oppression, whether it's coming from the state, whether it's coming from or whether it's coming from the private sector or call that oppression and you don't recognize their right to, like, that um, they're just to be listened to because, you know, I mean, I guess the private sector in America justifies its oppression by saying that these people are, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of propaganda, you know, in favor of various billionaires. I mean, there's the classic Fox News. Oh, they're just hardworking and it's meritocratic, right? Um, Most of that's nonsense for why should have so much power, insane levels of power over our society. Or it's either meritocratic, or that they're benefiting us by doing various things. Like, they're creating jobs. Can we ask what kind of jobs? Is it, are they creating jobs for people making bombs to blow up other people's kids? Because, maybe we shouldn't have those kind of jobs. Some jobs shouldn't exist. Okay? But so, the libertarian psyop is is about convincing people that the entity solely responsible for the is, for oppression is the state, and and somehow like, giving them giving us historical amnesia about the role of the private sector and how it has been a full partner with the state in oppressing, because many of the same people who run who at the top of the government, they're in who are functioning in governing roles, they're very close, shall we say, or maybe are even the same people as the people who are running industry. And sometimes industry people, so-called captains of industry, get so powerful that they can literally, like Elon currently, can threaten to primary every person in Congress. Okay, um, this is um, this is an exercise of authority that doesn't even bother to justify itself, in terms of a good. In many cases, it's just naked exercise of power. If that's what you prefer, knock yourself out. If that's your idea of libertarianism, is somebody just nakedly exercising a power over you just because they can, just because they control so much of, like, the infrastructure of our society, like financial infrastructure, communications infrastructure, etc., that they have, like, massive, if that's your idea of libertarianism, you are freaking insane, okay? But in the last time I checked, this the size of the government is not the issue. The size, in this case, size doesn't actually matter. What matters is, what it's doing, whose interests are it serving. In the case of the state has, there is actually, it's not a self-justifying authority according to anarchist principles, but it does actually have some, at least a pretense of accountability. So, you can't, it has to, like in the United States, the government, in officially at least, acknowledges that you have the right to advocate for any policy that you want. Your political speech in the United States is, um, y- there's no limit on it, right? You can advocate for the worst things, and people in the government do that all the time. People in the government advocate for policies that would lead to the destruction of all life on the planet all the time, routinely. Okay? So, they do it all the time. They're constantly engaged in advocating for the worst things you can possibly imagine. And they have every right to do so. And so do you. You have every right to advocate for somebody could somebody could clutch their pearls and say that's the most horrible position you could ever take in you know conceivable position anyone could take, and they have the right to feel that way. But according to our official law of the land, the government might not like what you're saying, but they don't have the right to say you can't advocate that idea, that policy, that whatever. That's the official policy. Okay? They don't follow it, but it is the official policy. They're not following it right now. They break the rules all the freaking time, but they at least have to pretend that they support that idea of unlimited um, uh, speech, in terms of what kind of policy and what kind of politics you can have and what kind of policy you can advocate for, you know, and how you can say you can, they don't have the right to tell you you can't. You could advocate for, there was a guy on TV the other day saying, oh, this guy who we're going to deport, he advocates for eradicating the United States or eradicating Western civilization. Well, actually, that's protected speech to advocate for that. Okay? Uh, According to the United States government, that's protected speech. According to um, any number of corporations, they don't acknowledge that you have any rights. They don't recognize you have any rights. The state recognizes that you have rights. The corporations don't recognize that you have rights. So, okay, what happens? What happens when you have this system where you have a private sector and a public sector, a state that are basically full partners in oppression, you know, and you make the one of them that actually has some semblance of accountability and, at least has the pretense that it has to recognize your rights, and then you have the other one that doesn't have any such pretense, and you shrink the one that has the pretense and has that it has to justify its actions in those terms, in terms of human rights, and you shrink that one, and leave the ones that the side, the private sector side, that doesn't acknowledge that you have any freaking rights. It doesn't recognize that you have any rights. That doesn't even bother to justify itself. It just tramples your rights. It just tells you, oh yeah, I'm gonna suspend your account. I'm gonna hide your or maybe it doesn't tell you. I'm just gonna um, algorithmically bury your tweet so no one will see it, or whatever. What happens when you shrink the power and you shrink down and make it weaker, the entity that is at least paying lip service and acknowledging and to the fact that it recognizes that you have, as a human being, you have rights, and you just give let and you shrink that down, but and that's the only thing that theoretically can challenge the entity that, that entity over here. This entity gets weaker, and the one that, theoretically is accountable to you, and this entity gets bigger and bigger over here. The one that's not accountable to you and doesn't have any incentive or doesn't bother to even justify that it has your interests at heart, or doesn't have to. It can propagandize you that it has your interests at heart, and if you believe that, I have as Jimmy Dore likes to say, I have a vaccine I would like to sell you. But